The gospel accounts say that just before Passover, Jesus entered Jerusalem riding on a donkey. The gospels say that he was greeted by crowds waving palm branches and hailing him as the Messiah. But what about those who assert that Jewish travelers always erupt in celebration when they arrive in Jerusalem for Passover? They were just singing and shouting as usual. They weren't singing about Jesus.
There may have been some people that greeted any pilgrim entering the city with those kinds of shouts, but they don't throw their garments down on the road. They don't take palm branches and wave them. And they don't greet someone riding on a donkey this way. All of these things smack anyone who knows Israel's history. They realize this guy's doing what Zechariah 9:9, the king who comes to the city humble. That's what he's doing. And the palm branches and the garments that are placed on the road. This is how they celebrated the entry into the city of other kings from Israel's past. So they knew what they were doing. This was a messianic greeting on the part of many of these pilgrims.
How many people were following Jesus when he came to Passover in Jerusalem? Some scholars featured in the ABC special said Jesus only had 10 or 20 followers.
I was astonished by that statement because one of the things that we read in the gospel account is that the ruling priests wanted to make a move against Jesus, but did not do so on account of the crowds, on account of Jesus' popularity. If Jesus had a following of 10 or 15 or 20, then Jesus could have been seized easily right at the beginning of that final week. And they would not have had to conspire and plot and try to take Jesus at night by stealth because he would have had no following. And so the fact that they had to move against Jesus in a stealthy fashion shows that there were large numbers of supporters, both from Galilee who accompanied him south, and also recent converts, you might say, from Judea and Jerusalem themselves.
Besides questioning the number of followers Jesus had, some scholars wondered why Jesus wanted to go up to Jerusalem at all. Wasn't he aware that he might be killed?
Oh, I don't think it would have taken a clairvoyant person to know that in a politically volatile environment, if you go around doing the kind of things Jesus did and saying the kind of things Jesus did about the coming of the kingdom of God, that you could anticipate a violent end to your life. There's no doubt about that.
I think he understood that he was going to have to die, and no prophet dies outside of Jerusalem. And so Jesus has this sense of prophetic destiny to complete and fulfill his mission. It was time to go to Jerusalem. And what better time than to go at Passover time, the time that celebrates God's deliverance of his people.
And that meant that he had to make certain declarations in the capital as the heartbeat center of the nation. And he also had to make claims of authority, which forced the choice. If you go through the passages in the last week of Jesus' life, virtually every one of them is about some issue tied to the authority of Jesus and or God using him as an agent, or some aspect of who his person is.
When Jesus walked into the temple and turned over the tables of the money changers, was he a marked man from that point?
Yes. I mean, absolutely. He's in the most sacred spot of Israel.
What he's done is he's interrupted the process, not only of tribute money that supports the institution and allows it to exist, the temple as an institution, but he's interrupted the process that leads to the sacrifices.
There's not a chance in the world Caiaphas would not learn of that and be very angry about it. But to size him up, Jesus has taken action in the temple precincts, and shortly thereafter, perhaps the next day, or however we are to interpret the timeline in Mark, a delegation of ruling priests comes to Jesus and says, by what authority are you doing these things? I mean, they're still standing there, and he turns around and says to his own disciples, a man had a vineyard, and he goes on alluding to Isaiah 5, tells this parable, but he introduces new characters into this parable. Isaiah doesn't say anything about farmers tending the vineyard, Isaiah 5, but Jesus does. And of course, he's introduced the ruling priests into his parable. And they recognize that he's told the parable against him. He has answered the question. By what authority does he do these things? From God. In fact, more than that, he's God's son who's come to the vineyard. And these guys, the ruling priests, are about to murder him. And they go away saying, we've got to destroy this guy. He is serious trouble. Because he has just indirectly threatened us with being removed and replaced. So that's it. It's escalated to the point now it's either him or us. This town is not big enough for both of us. We got to get rid of him.
Aware of the danger, Jesus went to the Garden of Gethsemane to pray. Some scholars in the ABC special describe Jesus as one who was deeply shocked and appalled at what he faced. A person who, because of fear, was on the edge of a complete mental and physical breakdown. It was further implied Jesus could have easily escaped when he saw the soldiers coming for him, but instead decided to walk right into their hands.
He's not committing suicide because he doesn't take his own life. But there is some truth to that observation. Had Jesus wanted to flee, he could have fled. Jesus has informants. He knows, to some extent, what's going on in the city. He knew it was hot. He knew he had to be careful. There were secret arrangements made for the upper room. So if Jesus simply wanted to save his life, if that was his objective, he would have gotten out of town a day or two before he was arrested. But no, he wanted to fulfill his ministry. I believe he sincerely believed that his death was necessary to complete his task.
Then, Jesus was taken to trial. In Mark, we have two, one at night, one first thing in the morning. We have the same thing in Matthew. In Luke, we only have one Jewish trial, just in the morning. In John, we have no Jewish trial at all. Do we have contradictory reports?
No, what we have here is selectivity. I think that Mark and Matthew are giving us kind of the full portrait. I think that Luke's giving us the Reader's Digest version, and I think John, in connection with his usual style, is giving us trial scenes or interview scenes that we don't know about otherwise. And again, in asking about the trial, this is a grand jury investigation. It's not a formal trial. Had it been a trial, they couldn't have met on a feast day. But because this is a special situation, an emergency situation, they've got Pilate right there in the city. They can finish the job in the weekend if they get on it. They get on it and get it done.
Mark records, the high priest arose and came forward and questioned Jesus, saying, "Are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed One?" And Jesus said, "I am, and you shall see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of power, and coming with the clouds of heavens." And tearing his clothes, the high priest said, "What further need do we have of witnesses? You have heard the blasphemy. How does it seem to you?" And they all condemned him to be deserving of death.
At that point, when the Jewish priest says, "Are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed One?" notice what Jesus does. Are you the Christ, Messiah, the Son of God? And Jesus says, "Ego me, I am." And then he changes a Son of Man, Son of God question to a Son of Man answer. He says, "I am the Christ, the Son of God, and you will see the Son of Man coming with the clouds of heaven in judgment." And the priest makes a formal declaration of blasphemy. He rips his garment. He says, "Look, the rest of you witnesses can go home. We got you."
This is one case where Jesus himself affirms explicitly his messianic identity, and that, in my opinion, points to the veracity of the Gospels. If the Gospels are fictions, they're going to have Jesus walking around all the time saying and doing messianic things. The Gospels don't do that, and I think that's because the Gospels are restrained by what actually happened, what Jesus actually said.
Now, what set him off? In the passage there in Mark 14, Jesus says, "Ego me, I am the Son of God." Then he says, "And you will see the Son of Man come with the clouds of heaven." Number one, it's a virtual quote from Daniel 7:13 and 14. He claims to be the pre-existent one who comes from the Ancient of Days to set up God's kingdom. And secondly, he uses this enigmatic phrase, "coming with the clouds." That phrase is used dozens of times in Scriptures as a reference to deity. And Jesus said, "That's me."